Welcome back. We're continuing these conversations that are follow-ups to Dan's videos on the state of the church. And for this conversation, I'm with Jake Nold and Bret Mav. It's great to have you guys here today. And we're just going to explore and have a little bit more conversation about what you just saw in that previous video. So we're going to talk a little bit about Calvary's history. I've only been at Calvary for about 5.5 years, so I love digging into a little bit of the history, the humble beginnings. And so, when Dan talked about not just the history, but the pioneering spirit, what kind of stood out? I mean, before we actually started recording, we were just chatting a little bit about this, Jake, and you had some really neat insight to some of the history.
Yeah, that's a good transition.
Yeah.
Get me to talk. That's great.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the most powerful pieces for me is when they, they had the money, they were going to buy this smaller property. That's where they were going to do church. And the two pieces of it that really stuck out is they were ready to make a decision, but they said, you know what, let's stop, let's take 3 days and let's pray. So that was the first piece that you can't miss. Like, that piece is so important. And then the second piece is, someone came to them and said, we have this property 4 times bigger and it's not accessible. Like, there's not really a road to it. This isn't an ideal spot, edge of town. And they bought it, which turned into 1250 University Drive, and University is like one of the main roads in this area. So it became kind of like a hub. And they never would have, they couldn't have known that. They were just kind of trusting and saying, you know what, this 3 days of prayer, God gave us this opportunity. He's going to do something with it. And that's just a really powerful piece. And so much of our history is tied to that building and the things God has done through us in that building. And so that piece was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Bret, for you, how does that piece of history, kind of capture your imagination?
Well, we weren't talking about this before, but hearing you tell the story again, sometimes it takes a couple of times. I'm just thinking about, I was a freshman in college.
Yeah.
And I would walk with friends from East Halls to 1250 and down University. Of course, the accessibility of that was, college students will walk further than most probably. But for us, that was just, take 45 minutes, walk down, whatever it took, and go there. So just the impact that had on me personally. And now, of course, I've been working here on staff for a couple of years. But hearing the pioneering spirit linked with that story, it just emphasized for me that, to be pioneers, we have to go where there are no roads. And that's, that might even be a Back to the Future quote, where we're going there. We don't need roads or whatever Doc says. But for real, when you're talking, in the metaphorical sense, you've got the established colonized places and then you've got the frontier, and you have to be willing to go someplace where the end of civilization ends and you're into the wild. And in the spirit, I think that means trying to figure out what's next by listening to God. I love that it had to do a lot with prayer in the story. There's no way to do it other than that. And then be willing to go someplace that maybe looks a little funny, or people look at you halfway like that's not going to work, but you can see something that they can't because God has showed it to you. So
Do you think pre-pandemic the church became complacent and lost any of that pioneering, ability, desire? What have you guys seen?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a piece of complacency. I think the other side of that too is what the church had been doing for so long was working. I don't think we discount, when we're talking about this pioneering spirit and doing something new, I don't think we discount everything that the church has done in the past, but we also have to realize that times change, culture changes. People don't have as favorable of a look on the church now as they did, 20, even 10, 15 years ago. And so I think we got complacent in the sense of saying, this used to work, let's make it work now, instead of saying this used to work, things are different, we need to change how we're delivering this, how we're bringing this to people, how we're loving people. So I think it's a little bit of a both and. I think it's really easy to get complacent, and I think it's really hard to change. So it was kind of a double whammy. And like we've talked about in other videos, the pandemic, accelerated everything 5 or 10 years. And so not only are you dealing with that kind of complacency and the change of the culture, but it was hyper accelerated, where I think there was a period of time there where it was just like, we don't even know what to do. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I like the idea that maybe we were complacent, only because it doesn't have to mean, I guess it is kind of negative, but the reality of the kingdom is it's always expanding. So as soon as you stop taking new ground, then you're out of step with what God is doing. Yeah. Plain and simple. Yeah. And so there's a possibility there that we were, but I think also the other side of that could be that we were stuck.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that, through the negative events of a global pandemic, one of the things that God used it for, not that he gave us a global pandemic, but one of the things he used it for was to deliver us from doing things in the same way.
For sure.
As soon as you can't meet in the building for 18 months, 2 years, whatever it was, then you've got to find different things to do. And I think that really sparked some innovation.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
When I think about the years leading up to the pandemic, there's been prayer and worship movements.
Yeah.
There's honestly the evangelical church in particular has always been about global missions, which I think needs to be said. And so those are things that I don't think it's stagnated utterly. That's been
That's a good point.
Yeah. So I think really maybe it was more about domestic missions, if you could say it that way, that God, I know that at Calvary, that's what the Lord's been trying to push us to.
Yeah.
How do we reach across the road if we're willing to reach across the globe, but maybe not, I guess.
Well, I think there's also this sense of, we've become comfortable with being consumers. We know we go to the building for a weekend service, and we have these expectations of what, Pastor Dan or in the Big C Church, the preacher brings, or the worship team, or the children's programming, or guest services, and it really has become consumption versus how do we become active participants in the mission. And so as we think about what can pioneering look like moving forward, what are some of those things that maybe Calvary has already kind of put a line in the sand and says, here's something we're going to do to blaze a new trail. It's unique, it's different, but it's something that we believe we need to do to see disciples become disciple makers.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we've talked about is COL Sundays. Like COL Sundays was something that we took time praying about. We took a lot of time discussing of like, what does it look like in this next chapter to play without the queen? So that idea of like, take the queen off the board, that's the best way to learn chess. We kind of thought Sunday mornings was our queen. That was what we put all of our eggs into, that one basket. And so we felt like, I think what we felt is like a step of God was saying, okay, we need to do something kind of drastic to see where God will take us. And a big part of that was front yard mission. So we said, let's take off one Sunday a month and let's love our neighbors. And I don't personally know of any other churches. I'm sure there's got to be a church out there in America that takes a Sunday off, but there's not many. And so that was a trailblazing, pioneering step where we didn't know if it would work. This wasn't like the end all be all. We weren't like 100% this will bring us exactly where we need to go, but we knew we needed to try something different that was more than just like a small change on a Sunday morning, something that would rattle and shake not only people, but the church. So,
and that's one of the things that you may have a thought on that, and we'll come into that. But one of the things that I have grown to love and respect so much about Calvary specifically is the willingness to take risk and to do things that are just not the norm. Yeah. And not everything works out the way that we, pray that it will. Yeah. But there's also that recognition and that humility that says, that didn't work. We're going to shift gears, and here we're going to try this. But I love that focus. I was at a conference about a year ago, and Calvary hosted it at Harvest Fields, and I introduced myself to a gentleman. He was from the Pittsburgh area, and he was like, "You're on staff at Calvary, the church that doesn't meet 1 week in a month." Yeah. Wow, that was a really, really bold decision. Yeah. Like, how's that going? And it was really interesting. Here is a gentleman from Pittsburgh that had heard what we're doing here in the Central PA region, and he admittedly said, I'm not willing. I'm not bold enough to take that kind of a risk. But he's watching. He wants to know how it's working, and it's interesting to see how that plays out. I think for a lot of people, a lot of friends that I personally have, it's kind of it's not a weekend off.
Right.
That is not the intent of a CWOW weekend.
Yeah.
The focus is be the church.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that Calvary has done so well for so long. We've not settled.
Right.
We've done so many things to bless other people, whether it's generosity, whether it's just serving others.
Yeah.
We've not settled, and I love being part of something like that.
Yeah.
It's really good. What we're talking about is disruption at the institutional level, right? The weekly program, the official building of Christianity. But it makes me think that, like, what is so powerful about the gospel, about the faith, is it literally can be taken by anyone, anywhere. This is the John 4 famous conversation. Which mountain are we going to worship on? And Jesus goes, no, it's not going to be about which mountain, which building, which temple, which cathedral. It's going to be about worshiping in spirit and truth. And what that has always meant is that, if you want to build a building, if you gather the people, it'll work.
Right.
Spirit of God will be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do the word, you can do the songs, the people will be there. But it works just as well with some 12-year-old Iranian schoolgirl with nothing but a Bible verse in her head that's lit her heart on fire and the Spirit of God on her, doing a little secret prayer meeting somewhere. Right. The gospel will take root and will spread like wildfire. And that's fire. And that's why we see all these subverting images of like leaven and yeast and mustard seed. This is like Jesus's constant use of these images is that just thing. Anybody can take it anywhere. And I think that's the pioneering spirit that we're going to see. And that's behind CWOW. Like, it's not a week off. It's a week to scatter seeds. Yeah. And it's like, we don't have to gather in this building, because anybody that's been gathering in this building, you have literally everything, the full gospel in you to go somewhere besides the building and see what God will do. And that's just what we're trying to get people to do, and ourselves to do as Christian leaders and people that come and partners with us. So it works, and we just got to get out there and just put it to the test and plant it somewhere else, wild and weird, and see what God will do. Yeah.
But you mentioned the word gospel twice, right there. And if we go back to the last conversation we had from the previous video, one of the 6 things that Dan pointed out is that the focus on Bible time is weak nationally. And so we have got to get back to prayer and time spent with Jesus in the Word. I mean, my goodness, it says that a recent study said 67% of the people in our country read the Bible less than 3 to 4 times a year. When I read that, I'm like, 3 to 4 times a year. So how can we do anything well for God if we're not investing time with Him? How can we desire to be a pioneer and blaze some new trails if we're not going to spend time listening to His still small voice? That just really compelled me. And so what that tells me we're doing is we're settling. Yeah. We're just settling for the status quo, and we kind of shrug our shoulders, and I don't know if I want to be a pioneer. Just let's make sure I'm comfortable, and it'll be okay. Yeah. But it's not going to be okay. Yeah, we're called into more than that. I love the words of Jesus in John 10. He says, "I've come to give you life." And not just life, but life to the max, life to the abundant, life to the full. And I think so often we just dismiss that, thinking it's okay, or I wish it was better, but I don't know what to do about it. Let's get into the Word. Yeah. Let's see what Jesus has for us. Let's spend time with Him.
Yeah, I love
so good.
One of the really cool things with CWOW Sundays is hearing some of those like small beginnings of people doing really small things, planting those little seeds and seeing them grow. And I think so often, especially when we're talking about reading the Word and prayer and pioneering, like I think everyone wants to be a pioneer. Everyone wants to be a part of a great move. But when it comes down to the nitty gritty, the time that you have to put in, the relationship, how difficult, like Jesus wants to be in a relationship with us, but that takes work, just like any relationship. Yep. And it can be hard for us to say, yeah, I want to put in that work to do this. We want to see the outcome, but we don't always realize all the work that is put into that. And I think with CWOW, man, it's such a simple, easy step of faith to say, yeah, I'm gonna talk to my neighbors. Like, I didn't do that before. That's a step for me. I'm gonna talk to my neighbors, and I'm gonna spend time with Jesus. I'm gonna know who Jesus is. I'm gonna be in a deep relationship with him. And like you're both saying, Bret was saying this a lot, before as we were talking about this, that importance of prayer and scripture. And we can't miss that piece of this if we want to be pioneers.
It's essential.
Absolutely essential.
Yeah. Dan said, don't just invite people to come. We need to be the church that goes to them. And we don't desire to be the best church in our communities. We desire to be the best church for our community. And I think that gets unfolded through our partnerships with other churches. Yeah. And we've seen that and how we've been generous to other churches and just given money to them to help them with some of their endeavors. Are there any final takeaways from this? I think this has been such a great conversation today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've said a lot. The one thing I keep thinking about is we want to think new thoughts and see new things, and you've already said it, that's going to happen in prayer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we need to be in the Word, we need prayer, and we're going to have our imaginations kindled in a way to see God move in ways we hadn't before.
Yeah.
But also listening to you speak, it made me realize that there is a portion of getting to know God in the secret place. Like you can't not do the work, so to say, the scripture and time in prayer. But then there's a part where you actually know him walking across the street and trusting him to open a door with your neighbor that is awkward because you don't know whatever. And you walk into the wasteland of a broken marriage or, something that's happened, and you get to spring forth with rivers of living water. And there's no substitution for watching God do that. You actually can't get that in the place of prayer.
Right.
But then you got to go back to the place of prayer to get more courage and insight. And there is the interplay of both. So I think if we do that, we're going to see God do amazing things.
Yeah.
So good. Dan gave us 5 things, and he asked the question, are you settling in generosity, prayer, leading through discipleship, serving others, and then your own personal front yard mission? And just want to say, stop it. Don't settle. Move on. God's got so much good for you. So, hey, thanks for joining us for this conversation today.